hope everyone's doing well, and welcome to the first episode of Basement Couch Contemplations. This is a series that I'm putting together that's kind of really diving into my personal thoughts about a lot of various topics in regards to games, whether that's breaking down some game design elements, or just talking about my experience with a game. On today's episode, I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions about a game that I have only played for a handful of hours. I'm calling these episodes First Take and Last Take. In the Last Take episode, I'll go over my thoughts after having a more thorough experience with the game, either after I've fully completed the game, or just an extended amount of hours of time playing the game, and kind of see the varied change in my opinion about the game. Today I plan to cover a little bit of Helldivers 2. I've been loving this game, and it's really refreshing to play a multiplayer game that is about the fun of playing the game rather than how they can just make it endless, mindless play that just keeps people forced into cosmetics and buying kind of useless things, whether it's through in-game currency or through actual money. So it's been a pretty good experience, but I'll break down a little bit more about that further in. Just kind of want to set up that I actually have never played the first Helldivers. I don't even really know much about it. I've been playing with a friend of mine, and he explained that it's more of like a top-down twin-stick shooter type game, and so this is a pretty big departure from that, and I just kind of putting that out there as like showing that I have no bias on exactly how the first game was and not pulling from any background. I actually thought that it was originally like a strategy game, kind of a RTS style, top-down like StarCraft or something like that, so it didn't appeal to me at all. I'm not as into that style of game as I am to like third-person shooters and action-adventure type games. But I've really been enjoying the style that this game has. It has a ton of personality. The humor is great. I love all the ridiculous things they say.
Say hello to democracy!
The obsession about democracy and freedom in such a way that though you can't like see the depth of their actual culture there on Super Earth, the planet that humanity resides and has expanded from in this universe, but it's just funny to see them declaring democracy as they just annihilate a bunch of aliens with bombs, and it's pretty hilarious. One of the things that stood out to me on the humor is the little bit of like user reviews of stuff. When you try to buy things from the store, it'll have like little notes with star ratings about what people thought, and it totally has a level of meta humor to it. Currently, with the issues with their servers struggling right now, they've increased XP to kind of say an apology for it being difficult to connect and play the game, and just the fact that they made it feel like it was within the world rather than within our world was really a pretty hilarious and creative way to go about doing that. Even though, obviously people are quite frustrated about struggling to get in, but it's just a nice little silliness that just adds to the style they have. That kind of is blended in with what is the style of gameplay, and it feels very serious to a degree. I mean, obviously you're like in a battlefield. It feels like you are at war. And so it just reflecting with the goofiness of the characters' comments.
Liberty by life!
It pushes you back and forth between the grim reality of these people just going out there and dying here left and right, and just like the humor of it all in this scenario. So an interesting take that I haven't personally really ever experienced before in a game. One of the things that I found most endearing about the game is the chaos of the game is a huge part of the fun. In a lot of games, I feel like dying is a point of frustration. It feels like a point of failure. And that's not entirely untrue in this game. It is rough to lose a mission when you've run out of the ability to respawn your character after having just been overwhelmed by enemies too much that you or your teammates can't really help you out no matter what because of just the overwhelming odds. But it's enjoyable when the world feels so simulated. Anything could happen that in real life, would take your life. A misdirected grenade that can ricochet off enemies, or, you just hold it too long, it blows up your own hand. As well as the sentry guns. They can just shred you to death. And, at first, if you don't know that, is a big surprise. And it's kind of has a shock value that you're just like, wait, what? And then you're laughing about it because you just realize that that's how this works. Getting killed by a drop pod is just out of nowhere. Just the threat of everything in the world is really a big part of what makes it enjoyable to me. And those different aspects are just littered throughout the game. I could just go on forever about how many different mechanics in the game seem to turn on you in a sense because you just don't realize that they will impact you. Whether it's mortar cannons, you set it up so that it defends your position. But if you can't hold back the enemy at a distance long enough, then it will start firing down on your position. And it's just like terrifying not knowing if this is going to work to your advantage or if it's going to work against you. And that I feel just doesn't happen often in a lot of multiplayer games. There's like a lot of structure and a lot of understanding of how things will play out. There's just so much chaos in this game that it's a blast. Well, some of the other elements about the game that I find really awesome, which aren't groundbreaking by any means, but when you're choosing a mission, there's a day-night cycle to the planet. And depending on where that mission is located, will determine if you start in day or night. And it's interesting that if you choose a mission that's near where the day and night line is, like it could blend into nighttime if you take too long on the mission. As the planet is live, it's kind of simulated in that it'll just continue to move without you. That kind of stuff that makes the world really feel alive, along with other things like the environmental effects. Like there can be dense fog that is only up in mountainous areas. As you come down the mountain, you can kind of look back at where you were in the chaos of the fog, where you're just getting killed left and right, to then see how clear it is. And it just changes the danger levels, the stress, everything. But it also just makes the world feel that much more alive. All those different elements combined together really just makes design simple, but yet adds a lot of variety to the player experience. I feel like just not knowing how things will go because of simple mistakes you make, and just adapting all the time on the spot to the different chaotic turn of events that take place. In regards to the progression system in the game, I feel like it's done in such a way that I would say is the best I've seen done in multiplayer in a long time. It heavily emphasizes the need for skill progression. There's a level of progression that no store-bought item will ever change. That, I think, is really what drives me to want to keep playing the game, is that I see there are goals, there are things that I haven't experienced yet because of difficulty level restrictions, and I really just want to get to that next level. And the things that you can buy do increase your odds of success, but not by any large margin. It's different things that make it just a bit easier to time your grenades. A shorter fuse grenade. You're taking something that does less damage, but you can more gauge when it will explode. And the further in you progress through the different pages where you buy different war bonds, you can get to the point where you get an impact grenade. So you don't even have to think about time. It's purely about accuracy. As soon as that makes contact, it's going to blow up. And that can make things a lot easier if that's your playstyle. Just varies up the experience. So the way the game starts, you are restricted to just having the assault rifle and the longest fuse grenade that I think there is in the game. And so it kind of puts you with not the worst items, but items that you really have to kind of adapt to if it's not your playstyle normally. And I think that's really nice because then as you make progress through the game, you can expand your experience on your playstyle. And it really encourages this experimentation with the stratagems and the different equipment that you can get as you first start with what you have. So things like boosters, which will increase like limb endurance or your starting ammo capacity, is stuff that you don't even unlock until you've put in quite a few hours. And those are things that on a higher level of difficulty can make or break your success on a mission. But in early levels, they really don't matter. It's really about curving your skill level at the game more than anything. I like that the stratagems, they unlock a bit faster than other things that are more like passive skills. A lot of times in games, I get really frustrated at the progression design where you're just increasing your stats. You're just making it so that I got plus 5% to this or 2 armor rating increase to that. This is probably coming more from like an RPG standpoint, but those things are so minuscule and so unnoticeable. It's frustrating if you put in hours into a game and hoping for something fresh and new to come through your efforts and time spent, only for you to get something that you, without looking at the numbers, won't even know the difference between when you did less than 5% additional damage or not. So I do like that this game provides improvements that change the way you play, that change the experience and keep it fresh constantly. The passive buffs are through what they have, ship modules, or what they're called, and those take the longest to get. Honestly, you have to collect these different samples across the map, which are not very abundant on higher levels. I've seen that they increase the quantity across the map for different things, so you can progress faster if you can play on harder difficulties, but it's still not a quick experience to get those ship modules unlocked. I have 2 unlocked and now put in about 20 hours into the game. I can't praise Arrowhead Game Studios enough for just how awesome their progression system is. It's maybe the best I've seen in a multiplayer game ever. Definitely the best I've seen recently. So, props to them. Another thing I really appreciate about the game, and is really nice to see, is that your end goal in the game is to reach the hardest difficulty and to complete missions on that level. But it's not required. You can enjoy the game at any difficulty level you want. The progression will be slower because obviously the game is encouraging improvement in your skill and experience, but it eases you into that in such a good way and allows you to reach a point where you're comfortable and then, take every once in a while a chance to test your skill. Me and my friend have been kind of capped at hard difficulty when we're only playing with a squad of 2. So we have been playing around challenging difficulty, and that has been great. We will obviously kind of restrict ourselves in terms of the resources needed for increasing our ship module levels, but it's at a place we're comfortable right now, and as we get more time with the game, and as we get more people to work together in a squad, I know that we'll be able to reach the next level of difficulty and the next one after that. And that's doesn't require a lot of additional content. It's a clever design in that you can play the same procedurally generated maps and have very different experiences. Different enemy types continue to form as you get into harder and harder difficulties. New challenges you've never had to face before, and it's a blast. And it doesn't feel like it's going to get old. I haven't put in enough time quite yet to be able to declare that. This is a first take. So after I put more time in, I'll be back and be able to share if that changed for me. If I did start to feel like, even with all the variety of gameplay styles there are, that this game still loses a bit of its luster and just starts to become repetitive like most competitive multiplayer games, or even co-op multiplayer games. I just really think that that's a really good design for endgame content and really provides a level of accessibility to everyone who plays. So I have a lot to say about the things I really enjoyed about the game, but there are still some negatives that I need to address. But it's nice to see that the good outweighs the bad. Kind of going back into that skill cap, there is a level of restriction to the amount of players you have in a squad. So for myself, I've been playing with only one other friend, but we really do feel like we are capped at hard difficulty, as the enemy types that we fight and the quantity of those types of enemies is just too high that we can't, just the two of us, have the necessary stratagems to take care of such threats, particularly the chargers. Those enemies are just such massive tanks, and when you're fighting 3 or more of them at once and continuous swarms keep coming of enemies, then it just becomes an impossibility for 2 people to take care of them. Obviously, this is not entirely true. There are people who I know have a much higher skill level than me with this game, and I know that they probably could even run these difficulties solo. But for the average player, there's definitely a level cap to people not playing in a full squad, which I think that's great for the social aspects because it encourages, reaching out to other people and getting more people into the game. And I think that's been a huge success for the game, is the word of mouth and people enjoying this experience and bringing more and more people in. It can be a bit restrictive. It can feel like I have to play that way. I can't just play with one other friend. I have to play with 3 other friends, or I can't really attain everything the game has to offer. So that is a bit of a negative, even though I did just say that that increased difficulty system is a beautiful thing about the game, but that's something I'm already seeing right now. So there's a couple other things with the mechanics of the game, some of the functionality of controls. The player is not completely free moving. There's a bit of restriction in terms of you have a stamina gauge and your character can't dodge quickly. You do have a dive. That's the closest thing you're going to get to a dodge to get out of some chaos. But really, it's like a quick save from dangerous threats. But it isn't like a guarantee that you've escaped lethal attacks. Like, you dodge and another group of enemies comes in quick, you're actually in a much more vulnerable position, especially against melee enemies, when you're prone. So, it isn't the most fluid of movements, and sometimes it feels unresponsive in terms of getting up from your prone to sprint. Sometimes the reload animations feel completed, and then you switch your weapon, but you come back and the clip is empty, and so you're kind of screwed in this situation like that. That happens sometimes, and I think those are flaws that may be improved with patches, but may also just be a nature of how the game is. They don't want you to be able to too easily execute movements that would make you almost unstoppable. You'd be able to avoid so much damage if you could move too freely and too quickly. So it's a restriction in design, but at times it feels a bit rough. Another negative aspect about the game is I feel like there's a large variety in types of armor that you can get, and it's awesome to see that it's not just a cosmetic improvement, but that there are stats tied to different sets of armor. But I think one of the issues that I have is that it feels like it's not varied enough. A lot of times you'll get armor that gives you +2 grenades, or +2 stims, or a 30% crouched or prone accuracy. Different things like that, but there's never really an armor that stands out as largely and drastically more powerful than others to kind of be a goal for the player to be like, oh, I want to attain that armor because I know that will change my experience. It'll make it so that I can overcome threats that before I was struggling with. And I feel like the same is true of most of the guns in the game. A lot of it is light armor restricted, that seems very deliberate in their design, that you are supposed to use your stratagem weapons to be able to face harder threats like that. But it would be nice if there were a few more weapons in the game that could handle larger threats. For the players who are getting to harder difficulties, it can help accommodate the struggle of fighting endless amounts of enemies that have a lot stronger armor, and kind of overcoming threats that in earlier stages of the game you don't have to deal with, but as you make that progress and you unlock these new weapons and armors, that they also are an increase for you as a player to be able to face the harder challenges ahead. I could also see that there's like a plateau that is occurring or could occur down the line. This is a bit of a jump ahead from first take into like my vision of what playing further into the game is going to look like, but you can get all these stratagems that are better and better, and you can get these ship modules that increase things, but there is a point, even if you had all of these things, it will require a certain degree of skill to be able to attain the hardest difficulties. That might not be the case for probably anything below the last two difficulties. Those, obviously I haven't played yet, but they might be so hard that even your passive abilities and having the best gear you can have won't change the fact that you need that. And I guess that could be a negative, but also the whole game experience so far has been to improve your skill, so that may just be a longer push for those final difficulty levels to kind of clear things up, to kind of wrap up your experience with the game. Another thing I could see down the line is the repetitiveness of things setting in maybe earlier than I'd hope. A lot of multiplayer games for me don't have too much draw because the experience doesn't feel fresh, which I've mentioned this one so far has felt really fresh. That the experience doesn't dull because of how different it is. I think part of that has been in the variety of mission types there are. Having played with my friend, we haven't even done every type of mission there is, and having increased in difficulty levels and seeing that there are new mission types unlocked through that leads me to believe that even if we tried every mission type that we can now, it still wouldn't be all the types of missions there are, and the differences between each are refreshing enough that I could put so many hours into one mission type on a different planet with different environmental hazards and effects that it would take so long before it would get old. But this is my first look at it. I'm not sure what it'll be down the line, but I am already seeing a bit of the repetitiveness in some procedural aspects of the game. Certain missions, when you get to the location to complete the mission, you can tell that the environment is always the same. For example, on the geological survey mission, you always have to plant the probe down to survey the landscape, and it always has this hill where you can kind of go up and set up as a good point of coverage over the landscape as swarms of enemies come in from different directions. There's definitely a sameness to it. Even on different planets, it has that same exact design for that section of the map. I think some of those things will be nice for higher difficulties if they stay maintained that way, because then you could already have an idea of how you go about handling that environment, that landscape. But I could see it becoming repetitive, a little bit mundane when you know exactly how to overcome the scenario before you even get there. I think the terminals that you have throughout the game were really cool to see that there's so many different like interfaces and puzzles, light minigame puzzles they have to kind of figure out on the fly. And there's so much variety in them that, once again, it's something that I don't know even after the hours that I've put in if I have seen every type there is. There may be more difficult ones in later missions that I don't know about yet. And that just knowing that there's so many things that could still be ahead that I'll have to experience and enjoy it just makes me want to play the game more and more. So that's my first take on Helldivers 2. And I mean, the game has just been such a blast, and I can't wait to keep making more and more progress to see what there is ahead. I can't recommend it enough, especially if you have a group of friends that you want to play with. It is just a great experience to go in and just see what happens. To just not know what is going to happen and working together as a team. It's so satisfying to have it done successfully, and it's still so satisfying when things go terribly wrong. And it's just an amazing experience that I'm glad that Arrowhead Game Studios put together. They are awesome as what they do, and I know that recently there's been server issues, and I hope that that gets cleared up soon, so that people who are still coming in large waves can continue to experience this great game, or to experience for the first time. I will be back again after I've put a handful more hours into this game to kind of report back on my thoughts and feelings about how it is when you put more time into it. Because I know some people like to just put in a few hours into a game, maybe 10 to 20 is kind of their max, and some people want a game that can really hold up for maybe up to even 100 hours of gameplay or more before they end up getting sick of it, or it just becomes too repetitive or boring. So to have a take where it's from the perspective of I just put a little bit in and I enjoyed it, and a perspective where I put a lot in and I'm still enjoying it, are the two takes that I want to get on this. So till next time, you guys keep on gaming, keep on having a good time, and I'll see you on the next one.